Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. I had a thought this week. What we really need to do is to do an all-members canvas again. Remember when we used to do that in the slightly older days? Remember, everybody would go and visit. You get a list of people to go and visit, and then everybody would go and visit them and do like kind of a check-in, share what's going on in the church, ask people how they're doing, tell them to give us more money. Remember those days when we used to do those kind of all-member canvases, right? Everyone loved doing those. And I was thinking it would be a really good idea for us to do that again. And then I thought, you know what would be even better? We should do an all-community canvas. So everybody in the congregation, everybody who's a member of the church, would go out and visit, say 15, 20 people in their neighborhood, right? And tell them about the church and what the church does and all those good things, and invite them to come and bring their money. And because, that's what we're all about. That's what stewardship is, right? At what point of all of that did you think I was starting to be joking? Was it the money part? Or was it right at the start? Or was it the moment that I said everyone loves doing that? So you wouldn't love to go out and visit all your neighbors and tell them about the church and what we do and invite them to come. Would it be simpler, actually maybe this be easier, would it be easier if, say, you lived in this part of the town, then you went and visited these people in another part of town, so it wasn't like your immediate neighbors, just in case? Would that be easier? Harder? Nobody wants to go and visit? Nobody wants to go and visit people? Tell them about the church? So, Jesus asked 70 or 72, depending on which version of the story you read, of his followers to go and basically visit people, and they jumped up and went. But we're not keen to do that. In fact, not only did they jump up and go, Jesus is the worst salesperson. Because basically he said, here's what I want you to do. And by the way, it's going to be you're going to be like sheep amongst wolves. And there'll be people who will reject you. Don't take anything with you. Because, you deserve to be fed and cared for and the kindness of strangers and all that kind of stuff. So don't worry about that. Don't take anything with you. You just go. Good luck to you. And yet they went. Why? Clearly nobody likes doing that. Why did they go? And it's not like Jesus being a bad salesperson. It's not like he doesn't come by that honestly, right? I mean, think of all the times that God has called people in the Bible, and they've just jumped up ready to go. Moses, he was super keen. No, he wasn't. Even the ones even Samuel, for instance, that story of Samuel hearing God's voice as a boy. He hears God's voice in the temple, and he thinks it's somebody else, because it couldn't possibly be God calling him. And then figures out that it is actually God calling. And again, he was super enthusiastic. Why is it that when God calls us to go and do things, in the Bible, people they go. They might not even be keen. I mean, there's no indication in this story whether or not Jesus stood up in front of his followers. And we're not talking about the chosen 12, right? The ones who've been following him around all the time and are, close to him. We're talking about followers as in could be somebody that just sort of started following Jesus last week or 2 weeks ago, or, a little bit longer maybe, somebody who's been around a lot, somebody maybe not. It's just 70 of his followers, ordinary people. Sends them off in pairs. You might not even get paired up with somebody you know. It doesn't say they went happily. They sure came back happy. But it doesn't say that they went happily. But they went. Why? Why were they so willing to go? And yet we don't even like visiting our neighbors sometimes. Let alone having to visit our neighbors and talk about Jesus. What if they decide not to be our neighbor anymore? Are we afraid of the rejection? Or are we afraid of the work it is to actually tell the story that we need to tell? Because the followers of Jesus who were sent out would have encountered that. I mean, he even tells them they're going to encounter it. What do you do when a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness comes to your door? Do you hide? Do you answer the door and tell them to go away? Do you invite them in, listen to what they have to say, offer them a coffee or a tea? What do you do? Tell them you already go to church and that you have your own? Sure. Yeah? So you do answer the door. Yeah. Because lots of people just go and hide. I had a friend, this goes way back now, but I had a friend who was Mormon, and this is even before, the Book of Mormon, the musical, who was Mormon, who said that one of the things that they learn right away is that it's important for you to answer the door even if you turn them away. Don't hide. Because they need to experience rejection. They do. It's in the story, isn't it? There will be places that these followers go where they will be rejected. And they need to experience that. It's part of the experience of being in mission, of taking the word out. It's not like Jesus was accepted by everybody. It's part of the experience. And so it's important for you to answer the door, and feel free to invite them in, of course, but it's also important for you to answer the door and say, no, thank you. Or, I go to church and I have my own faith, thank you very much. Rather than just, if you hide, they just think there's nobody home. So they didn't even get a chance to either talk to you or be rejected by you. And that's the two options in the story. There's no option where Jesus says, and you'll go to places also, there'll be communities where you'll knock on doors and there'll be no one home. Don't worry, it's because they're hiding in a back room. There's only two options. Either people will listen to you or they will reject you. Because the thought that people might not want to engage in relationship of some fashion would never have crossed Jesus' mind. Because that's the key part of this, isn't it? There's no social media, there's no TV, there's no news. News was shared personally by people. Even if it was something you didn't want to hear. And so again, we're back at why did they go? And there's no indication that they went happily or reluctantly or anything. They just did go. So we can speculate on that all we want. The thing is that they did go. So if I were to ask you, give you a list of people and ask you to go and visit these people, knock on their door, and tell them about Jesus and the church, would you go?
No.
Still no. Still no. How come?
Well, you're not Jesus.
Yes, I am. I talk about that every week. Sorry. For those who are watching, Terry just said we'd say no because you're not Jesus. Yes, I am. So are you. We talk about it every week. I mean, I'm sorry, but my logic here is flawless. For weeks, in fact, always, I am always talking about how Jesus is, the reason we can say Jesus is alive is because Jesus is in you and me. Jesus is in all of us, in all creation, right? The Spirit of life, the Spirit of God, whatever you want to call that, it's in all of us. So why wouldn't we want to share that? Stuff gets in the way, doesn't it? Like legitimately gets in the way. Fear is one thing that gets in the way. We're afraid. And why wouldn't you be? I can't imagine that all of the people that Jesus said, you guys now go and share this message, I can't imagine that they all went, oh great, yes, I'm super happy to be going and doing it. I'm sure some of them were actually quite afraid, especially if they were, headed off to a town that they knew they weren't going to be popular. Remember, we just had that story about how Jesus was rejected by a Samaritan town. Fear. And not just of rejection, but in those days you could legitimately be afraid of being attacked on the road, depending on where you were going. So the fear of actually having to encounter people and talk to people. Also the fear of your message. Did people want to hear that? Well, Jesus accounted for that. They may not want to hear that. But if you haven't given them the option of hearing it, how will they know? It's one of the interesting things about what gets people to church or not these days, right? There was a day, and even up until as recently as maybe in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s, there was a time when we went to church because it was an obligation. That's what you did. That's what Sundays were for. You went to church. And because you had that obligation to go, quite often you found, actually, this is kind of cool, and you got involved in other things, right? And then we started doing things like we'd have dinners, we'd have meetings, we'd have Bible studies, all that kind of stuff. But it grows out of the idea that you had the experience in the first place because you were obligated to go. In fact, go back further, and there was a time where you went or else. Right? You could be ostracized in your community if you didn't go to church. And that's not going back all that much further either. And now, it's not an obligation. We don't feel obligated to go to church anymore. We feel more obligated to ourselves to want to find something that has meaning for us. To find a way, if we are truly interested in the spiritual in ourselves, we will look for what meets that need. And it may not be sitting in a church on Sunday morning. There could be other ways. And for those who are looking for some of the things that churches used to offer, and remember, there was a time when churches did everything. It was a social hub. It was the place you went to it was even the place you went to for markets sometimes back in medieval times that, well, maybe only one or two of us will remember. But it was a center of things. Stuff happened there. Now stuff happens everywhere else. At the arena, at the theater, at wherever things are happening, and that's where we go. Where our needs are being met. We find a way. And so instead of being obligated to be part of this, we are part of it because we choose it. And so churches need to address that. We need to find a way to connect with people. And that may not be sitting in a pew on Sunday morning. It might not be even an online church service. It could be other things. And we are trying to find those things in an environment where some of those other things that we used to do because we were the center of things are now happening elsewhere. Social activities, for example. Justice activities. Any of those things that are meaningful to people, they're happening everywhere. So we need to find out We need to find out what it is that we offer that's of value to people. The story is that Jesus sent out these 70 or 72 to all the places he was going to go. It's like they were an advance party. So just to be clear, Jesus didn't send them out to places that he wasn't going to go so that they'd hear the message and he didn't have to go there in person. He sent them to places where he was going to go. So they went, and then they came back. And the information they shared with Jesus was valuable because it told Jesus which places he was now going to go to would receive him and which would not. It told him the places where people were interested in the message he had to share and the places that were not. It told him what those places were like and how he might address them. Right? Jesus famously likes to talk to people and use parables and stories that are meaningful to them. How would he know that it's meaningful to them? Well, he had this advance party go out and find out. This is the mission of the 70. It's not just to share the good news, like we often say, that's a phrase we often use. It's not the work of mission in terms of sharing Jesus and God and the good news and the Holy Spirit and all this with people. It is the work of finding out what people actually need in order that we can meet those needs. In order that we can connect with people in a way that is meaningful to them. Because here's the thing about saying Jesus is in everyone and the Spirit is in everyone. Yes, it is. But everyone's different. The Spirit is the one uniting thing. But in all our uniqueness and all our differences and everything, we communicate differently. We live differently. We have different hopes and dreams and visions of things. How will the Spirit speak to that if we don't find out how we can speak to that? Back in the day when it was an obligation to go to church, we were just talking about this just the other day. Pews are a relatively recent invention, you know. And by relatively recent, I mean like late Middle Ages, probably. Before that, you stood. And services were not an hour or less. They could be 2 or 3 hours. And you stood. You might sit on the floor, or if you pass out, you'd collapse on the floor, but you didn't have a seat. They brought pews in order to organize you, so that when the procession went by, they didn't have to have a guy out front with a club clearing the way. I'm not making that up either, by the way. That is true. That person is called a verger, and that was their job. These days now, particularly in places in England and Europe, they have a wand, but in those days it was a club, and their job was to clear the way for the procession of priests and clergy and choir and everything behind them. So we organized you into pews. And you shall sit in your pew. And there was places where you sat. And there was places where the rich people sat and the poor people sat. You had to buy your pew in some cases. Where you sat indicated your social standing in some cases. But you sat in your seat, and no one else sat in your seat. You did. And if you weren't there, there was trouble. But we are now back at that stage. We've gone like full circle. We're back at that stage where it isn't an obligation. I need to have a message worthy of you hearing. And I do. What I need to worry about is the manner in which I'm communicating it worthy of your hearing? Is the manner in which I'm connecting with you worthy of you? Because that's how you're going to choose. How will we find that out? Well, Jesus sent out an advance party of 70 of his followers to find out. See, back in the day, if some of you do remember those all-person visit things, the point of that wasn't to find out what your needs were necessarily or how we might better connect with you. The point of that was to tell you how you should meet your obligation to the church. That's why we don't do them anymore. Is because that reached a point where that was a horrifying experience if you were that person doing the visit. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't go out and connect with people and find out what it is that they need. So there's two ways that we can do that. One is, I'll give each and every one of you a list, and off you go. And we'll be checking up to make sure that you do visit everybody on the list. Or we can find a way to do that more informally. A way to reach out to people in the community in a way that encourages them to want to talk to us, to want to experience what we have to offer. And so we do some things like that. We do, excuse me, we do, even our children's summer program. Who does Christmas in July, for crying out loud? That's just nuts. And the thing is, for many of the kids that will be part of this, hearing the Christmas story, the biblical Christmas story, the foundation on which all of Christmas is built, might be a relatively new experience. They'll know who Santa is, but where does Santa come from? Well, there isn't anything about Christmas that isn't built on that original foundation of that story. How do we tell that? Well, I invite them to Christmas in July. We have some fun. We tell some stories. Robin dresses up like a sheep. Things like that. New and creative ways to connect with people because the obligation is gone. Now, I think of these 70 or 72 that Jesus sent out. I think they didn't just kind of go door to door and knock on the door. I think they probably each found creative ways to connect with people. That's why when they came back in joy. They didn't just knock on people's doors. I imagine them doing some creative things, creative ways to connect with people, maybe meeting people at the market, maybe organizing some kind of community event, some way in which they could connect with people. I imagine them going to communities and kind of scoping the community out a little bit first to find out. All things that we should be doing. Because the story isn't as simple as Jesus said go and they went. They shared the good news, they came back, everyone was happy, we all lived happily ever after. Because it's people. Even if you have a great message to tell, even if you have important things to share, not everybody wants to hear that. Not everyone wants to hear it from you. Not everyone wants to hear it the way you tell it. We need to take ourselves back as churches. I think we need to take ourselves back to the days in which we recognized the uniqueness of people in how we communicate with them. Find a new way to not just share the story and the good news of Jesus, but to live that compassion and grace that is the story. And when people experience that, perhaps they'll ask, why do you do that? Well, because. Perhaps we'll find better ways to ask people, invite people to share what it is that what can we do for you? How can we speak to you in a way that connects us, that builds relationships? That's what Jesus was doing here. Before he even went anywhere, he sent people to find out, what's my best way to connect with these people? What's my best way to connect with these people, whether they were willing to receive you or if they were not? If you were rejected here, that doesn't necessarily mean Jesus avoided that place. It means he already knew what he was up against when he got there. And that would have informed the manner in which he tried to connect with people. We need to be Jesus. We need to be Jesus in this way as much as any other, in how we reach out and connect with people, how we find out what is the best way. Listening and understanding and letting people share their story is maybe just the very beginning of that. But being Jesus isn't just about offering care and compassion, it's offering it in a manner in which people can receive it. We need to find out. Then, perhaps, we would be happier to say, yes, I will go. Yes, I will share. Yes, I will ask questions. Yes, I will invite people to tell me their story. Yes, I will go.